Nature determined the borders of Georgia, and history consolidated them. For this nation, situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, the main Caucasian range was always the natural border beyond which the Georgian population did not extend. For more than 3,000 years, the Caucasian mountains, with their inaccessible peaks, served as a natural barrier, difficult to surmount, both for Georgians and their northern neighbors. The southeast of the country is bordered with mountain massifs and great rivers. The west is washed by the waters of the Black Sea. Within this limited area, throughout the years, the Georgian people have lived. Here, the Georgian state was created. Abkhazia, located in the northwest, was historically and geographically part of Georgia. Throughout history, Abkhazians lived together with Georgians, taking an active part in the creation of a united Georgian state.
The Georgian language always used to be the language of divine service, the language of culture, the language of literature. All Abkhazia is covered with monuments of Georgian architecture, basically of church character. There are Georgian inscriptions distinctly indicative of the national character of the builders of these monuments and of the population as well.
During the 600-year reign of the Georgian kings, their primary title was ruler of Georgia and Abkhazia, and from the 15th to the 19th century, the same title belonged to the Georgian king Solomon I. In the well-known appeal of Abkhazian nobility, dated 1870, it is said, "As in ancient times, so now, the dwellings, the clothes, the food, the agricultural tools of Abkhazia are of Georgian origin. Only the language could give us cause to consider Georgia and Abkhazia separately. But even in language, there are many similar words. At the end of the last century, Abkhazians were headed by the representative of an old Abkhazian race, Mikhail Shervashidze. As with the other heads of independent Georgian provinces, he held supreme political and civil powers.
The last ruler of Abkhazia, Mikhail Shervashidze, was the father of my maternal grandmother. When the Abkhazian count was annulled, he was deported to Voronezh in Russia by the Russian Tsar. I remember the beautiful house, the great number of relatives. We used to be visited by our kinsmen, Georgians and Abkhazians. We communicated in Georgian, and as my grandmother would say, all official business was in Georgian. I'm now 90, and I cannot be mistaken.
Among the founders of Abkhazian literature in the 19th century was the Georgian Constantine Machavariani. This book, the first in the Abkhazian language, was published by Georgians in 1912. Later, the Abkhazian alphabet was improved under the supervision of the Georgian academic Akaki Shanidze. Abkhazians used it up to the reform of literature in the USSR in 1954. Since then, Abkhazians have used an alphabet based on Cyrillic. It was perhaps this moment which led more and more toward the chasm between Georgia and Abkhazia. Historians presume that the alienation of Abkhazians and Georgians began with the arrival of Turkish conquerors and Islam in western Georgia, or since the time of the Mahajirs, when 50,000 Abkhazians, rejecting Russian colonization, were forced to move to Turkey. The seeds of discord could have been brought here by the Minister of Agriculture of the Russian Empire, Ermolov. His laws encouraged settlers to leave Russia and gave them Georgian and Abkhazian land free of charge. The orientation of the Abkhazian People's Soviet in 1917 towards the alliance of the Union of Joint Caucasian Highlanders also could have promoted the rupture between Abkhazia and Georgia. With the proclamation of independence and the restoration of Georgian sovereignty on May 26, 1918, the government of the Georgian Democratic Republic granted them complete autonomy. The occupation of Georgia by the Red Army in 1921 brought a new balance to Georgian-Abkhazian relations.
Abkhazian Bolsheviks decided that if Menshevik Georgia gave them autonomy, Bolshevik Russia should give something more, independence. So the Abkhazian Soviet Republic was proclaimed. But the proclamation was a mere formula. The Abkhazian Soviet Republic was never subject to international rights. And in 1921 it established relations with Georgia, which were maintained until 1931. In 1931, Abkhazia, given rights of autonomy, was included into the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. This caused a new wave of discontent and aspiration towards separation among some politicians in Abkhazia. But within the framework of a totalitarian regime, these tendencies were not manifested. After Stalin's death, the murder of Beria and Khrushchev's thaw, Abkhazians regained their hope to separate from Georgia. From this, the feeling of separatism was regenerated. Approximately 70% of all chairs were occupied by Abkhazians. Suffice it to say, out of 12 ministers, 8 were Abkhazians. Out of 6 deputy chairmen of the Council of the Ministers, 4 were Abkhazians. All official positions, such as directors of factory, plants and other institutions, were Abkhazians. We had our own university, our own union of artists, union of writers, our own television, theater, newspapers, schools, etc. So there is no sense to talk about any restriction of rights.
The cause of the Tbilisi tragedy in April 1989, when Soviet soldiers killed 21 Georgian civilians, was the Abkhazians' letter to Gorbachev demanding autonomy for Abkhazia within Soviet Russia. The opinions and wishes of the Georgian population were not considered. Leaders of Abkhazia voted in the March referendum to remain in the USSR. They also miscalculated in August of 1991 when they supported the Moscow Putschists, who wanted to challenge perestroika and return to the Soviet regime. While in Georgia, people were being liberated from the old beliefs, here in Abkhazia, the communist banner was waving as before, with Lenin showing the way. Meanwhile, as the fate of the country was being decided, the Abkhazian parliament was calmly planning their separation from the Georgian state.
This policy resulted in the implementation of a military operation on June 24, 1992, when they surrounded the district where the Ministry of Internal Affairs was situated, took it by storm, insulted Georgian personnel, and finally divided the ministry into 2 parts. The separatist circles, the leaders of Abkhazia, needed the Ministry of Internal Affairs in order to legislate and thus legalize their unlawful forces.
The same day in Tbilisi, the political opponents of the new government captured the headquarters of Georgian television and undertook a state revolution. The armed march was suppressed by midday. The western part of Georgia was attacked by the same group, where they blew up bridges, tunnels, railway lines, trains, etc. By the end of 1992, the loss from the plunder of cargo alone exceeded 12 billion rubles. Criminal groups based themselves in Abkhazia, and the state government could not protect the highways and other roads. Therefore, the government of Georgia decided to announce a state of emergency along the entire length of the railway line from Azerbaijan to the Russian border. The National Army was assigned to protect this route.
These first divisions began to relocate to Abkhazia. The ordinary process within the framework of one state was taking place. There's no need to speak about the use of force. It's simply the subject that these divisions would escort the trains.
But sudden fire from Abkhazian guards and the appearance of the first killed and injured provoked an intense battle. A peace treaty, reached during the very first days of the conflict, was broken by Abkhazian snipers near Sukhumi, the capital city of Abkhazia. Georgian troops were forced to enter the city.
They were in the city for 3 days. They plundered Judat people, insulted all of the non-Abkhazians.
Generals of the former Soviet army promised Abkhazian leaders substantial amounts of weapons, ammunition, and men. The separatists left the capital city of Sukhumi and moved to Gudauta, where the Russian military base was located. They preferred confrontation to negotiation with the Georgian government.
Gudauta is just an area where the Russian divisions were situated, airborne and seaborne brigades, which entered without any agreement from our government, where the headquarters of 643rd Anti-Aircraft and Rocket Regiments were situated. This is the Regiment of Anti-Aircraft Defense. This is the landing strips of Strategic Pursuit Regiment of the 19th Army, just the spot where the main infrastructure of Abkhazia was situated. They received guns in advance, before the conflict began. Vice-Colonel of the above-mentioned 19th Army, Dolgopolov, sent them 6 small tanks. On the August 14, 1992, the military store in Gudauta was robbed. From this store, Abkhazians took 984 Kalashnikovs, 267 machine guns, 18 hand machine guns, 600 signal rockets, 500 grenades, etc., etc.
President Eduard Shevardnadze offered the separatists constructive dialogue. He suggested that the deputies who had left the city return, but his appeals received no attention. Finally, when the reciprocal agreement regarding a ceasefire was reached, Georgian military forces left the city. Abkhazian and North Caucasian mercenaries were permitted to leave the conflict zone. Abkhazian separatists guaranteed security for the Georgian population. Moscow, September 3, 1992. A meeting at the highest level between Russia and Georgia took place.
Наступил какой-то перелом, и действительно делегация
A turning point has come,
Абхазии
and,
поняла, что
as a matter of fact,
уходить
the Abkhazian delegation
такой нашей встречи,
understood
чем это
that it
невозможно.
is impossible to leave such a meeting with nothing.
Две главы государства России
We, the heads of 2
и
countries,
Грузии,
have subscribed to a
но
document
дальше
to
подписали
stop military confrontation
все
and to an
военные
overall
противостояния
ceasefire agreement.
прекратить,
And everyone has to follow us.
Если все условия, которые заложены в этом,
If the terms of the final document were to be implemented, everything will be peaceful by September, I am sure.
но, к сожалению,
But regrettably, the withdrawal terms of the troops have been broken.
на 3 километра. Однако,
On September 30, I felt that the Russian delegation was moving towards the Abkhazian side,
российские делегации
and I explain it with the fact that on September 17, it's a significant day in the life of Russia, because that day was the day of unification of the Red Browns and the ultranationalistic forces. It reflected the behavior of the executive power of Russia. Under the pressure of these forces, Russia took the Abkhazian orientation.
Understanding that separatism and fascism were not only internal Georgian problems, but a global threat, the head of state warned of the dangers of separatism at the 47th session of the UN, with Abkhazia as the example.
Such legal extremism results in a national and political confrontation, reflecting the mood of extremism of the part of minority. The highest ranks carried out the cruel dictates of will, drive to separating Georgia from its native lands. In the conspiracy against Georgia, which is now being revealed, the Russian red-brown reaction marched towards extreme fundamentalism, native fascism and separatism. The world should know about it.